from the moderate conservative position of Niall Ferguson, because he's saying that the present system is using both Keynesian and monetarist and fiscal restructuring, but perhaps not enough to his liking. And Paul Krugman is saying that they're not doing enough on the monetarist side of expanding the money supply and having a much stronger governmental input. And Joe Stiglitz has basically said the same thing as Paul Krugman. What is my view? Well, none of them have talked about the problem of capitalism in producing a surplus which is unattainable to its consumers. Paul Krugman spoke as I said in my Matt Fry interviews Joseph Stiglitz video, that Paul Krugman said that the real problem of US economics started in the 80s, the real split between them. And this is an era which Niall Ferguson says is a great era for US capitalism. But it was also the era when you got vast inequality between peoples, as Paul Krugman said, about the union busting. And perhaps the reason why these two people, Niall Ferguson and Paul Krugman, hate or dislike one another so much is not simply the things that they disagree on, but the things that they agree on. They're both saying that we need to reindustrialise, and this I agree with them. But we need to tackle the structural problem of unattainable surplus, which leads in Britain to over 1 million homes being left abandoned. And also the role of international organisations, which Joseph Stiglitz has criticised, the World Bank and the IMF. You can see the way that the IMF treated Greece, which the Germans have got had more criticism of, but it was really the IMF laying down the role, and that's an American organisation. Don't be fooled by it saying the International Monetary Fund. The World Bank is usually a European-dominated organisation, and the IMF is usually an American-dominated organisation. You have the stark split between the monetarists and the Keynesians, but from my point of view, Niall Ferguson and Paul Krugman are actually, and Joseph Stiglitz are actually bridging those things. Now, my friend Nick said that I hadn't been as supportive enough of the populist Lou Dobbs way of doing things, perhaps. So sorry about that, Nick. But Lou Dobbs he didn't mention Lou Dobbs, but I know what he's talking about, the Ron Paul way of doing things. But Ron Paul wants to put tariffs on products coming in from Europe, probably, and China. But he is very good on the Federal Reserve. But he only sees the danger of inflation rather than a problem of deflation. We've gone through the recession. But the time to cut the inflationary target of the Fed, the time to tackle the Federal Reserve issue, was before the inflation caused the recession. Now we have deflationary problems, and we need to also restructure our economies, as the Germans and the ECB are doing, as in balancing, that's the European Central Bank, in balancing industrial output with finance. As I've said this many times in my videos, the American media, as Niall Ferguson said, as a attention deficit disorder. They are focusing on they've understood one thing. They've understood that there is inflation caused by the Federal Reserve. Thank God they have. But they haven't understood now that we have deflationary pressure because of all the people who are unemployed. So it's very difficult for me to say, as I am not a professional economist, to say, well, I have an economics background, to say who is correct on this issue. I would say that they're both correct, but the timing of the issuance of Niall Ferguson's fiscal restructuring needs to take place at a time when the economy is far more stable and able to take the hit of cuts to public services in the United States. This would not be applicable for Europe because Europe is a social democracy and we don't like cutting our public services. Whereas the United States, because it has a larger private sector, is perhaps better suited to restructuring on that point. What we mustn't get into is the debate between having a surplus or a deficit, of having continued structural deficits or continued structural surpluses. It seems that the ECB as the right way because it's taking a moderate view, which is in between the monetarist and the Keynesian arguments, which where we're not paying people on the Keynesian side simply to make, as Keynes said, put bottles in the sand and just pay them for that and let them buy anything else that they want to buy from just printing more money. On the monetarist side, on the von Mises side of things, we're not saying that the ECB is not saying that everything should be gold, the gold standard, and that we should have sound money that is on the gold standard. Because if we have a gold standard, we will simply give all the power away from the central banks, which are partially democratically accountable to the university system, the armed forces, the democratically elected government, to unelected gold commodity brokers who many of which are in countries hostile to the Western world, such as South Africa and Russia, in historical terms, and also China and India, and also those people who have vast amounts of wealth in their sovereign wealth funds, such as the Saudis and Bin Ladens. The problem that we might also say, which is a structural problem, is, and what Niall Ferguson has said, which is I agree with him, is that you cannot have structural deficits of £1 trillion per year. But more significant than that, what is the problem of having a £1 trillion deficit? If you're borrowing from if you can get past the fact that the markets will turn on even a country the size of the United States or the European Union, or as they've tried to against the European Union but failed. But even against the United States, if you have 100% debt in your currency, then your currency will fall, and you won't have any. Your currency is a signal of the confidence of the market in your currency and your industrial output. That's why the euro at the moment is higher than the dollar, because we have a greater industrial surplus. But it's the critical point, as I'm trying to make here, is that who do you owe that money to? If the European Union was the creditor of the United States, does the United States have a problem? No, it doesn't, because it can pay off those debts without ever having to fear that the European Unions are going to pull the plug. The European Union is going to pull the plug on the United States. That's for many reasons. That's economic, cultural, linguistic, and also basically racial reasons, because the more homogeneous nature of the Europeans with the Americans, of a Western world. And I'll speak about the West Mark as a concept in my next video. But bear with me here. Who do the United States owe their money to? They owe their money to Pakistan, to Saudi Arabia, to China. All people who want to kill Americans, basically. The Chinese maybe not want to kill Americans physically, but they want to kill America as a world power. Niall Ferguson speaks about Chimerica, the America and China being a symbiotic relationship, almost akin to being one country.